Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Real World Business Law. I'm Elizabeth Payne Madalena. I'm a senior associate here at Berenzweig Leonard, and I handle business and employment law cases. I am joined today by my fabulous colleague, Rachel Goodnight. Rachel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Rachel Goodnight, and I am the Legal Operations and Social Media Coordinator here at Berenzweig Leonard.
And today we're here actually to talk about a ripped from the headlines real-world example for especially small business owners when it comes to crisis response.
Yes.
And that would be the Try Guys, the recent
Yes.
situation they dealt with where they ended up removing an owner. It was very public, certainly there is a lot of different aspects to this, but what we want to focus on today are the things that a small business owner or any business owner really could take away from how the remaining three Try Guys responded to this and how they can use that if they are ever in the same situation or a similar situation should that happen. Before we dive in, Rachel, do you want to give a little background on the Try Guys and who they are?
Sure. So they were a group of 4 content creators who started a business together back in 2018, and they wanted to have creative control, put out videos where they try new things. Their whole vibe was positivity, and they created videos together. They did so successfully. They all owned this company together. They really wanted to inject the company with their own personality, their own values, and really create a company that they all felt that they could be proud of and proud to support and represent with the content they created.
Right, and my understanding is it's an LLC, and so we had four members, 4 co-owners, and they're all, this. It's a small company, from my understanding.
Yes. Over 4 years, they grew to maybe having 24 employees. We don't have the exact numbers, but around 20 employees.
Right. And my understanding is each of the Try Guys also have their own brand within the brand, so based on their personality. And Ned, the former Try Guy, had, what was his brand again?
The Wife Guy. His big claim to fame was that he was a loving husband and he had an adoring wife, and their relationship was a big part of the channel. Not only did they do side projects together, but she was featured on the channel. She had her own podcast on the channel. They did videos together. So it was a huge facet of his personality and his brand that was essential to how he participated in the business.
Right. And another important point here is the 4 Try Guys, now 3, but when they were 4, they are all, or at least Ned and some of the others possibly, were managing members. They were all executive producers, and from what we know, Ned was very involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. And as many may know, Ned's removal was precipitated by information, you could say, coming out about his, which he's now admitted he had a relationship with a employee of the company who we understand to be a subordinate.
Yes.
And so, again, that has been probably addressed at length and ad nauseum by many other videos out there. But what we want to focus on is what really struck me and struck Rachel, just working in our field, and as for me as a business lawyer, how the remaining 3 Try Guys really handled, from what we've seen so far, this situation incredibly well, especially given that they are such a small, young company. This is not something that, to our knowledge, they'd ever dealt with before. And there's a lot of great takeaways from small business owners.
Right, and I think there's also a lot that people can pick up from, because the 3 members who were kind of handling this crisis while the 4th one was put on pause during an investigation, these aren't people with a lot of business experience. They're not, serial entrepreneurs. This is the only business really that they started, or certainly the first one. And so they didn't have a wealth of experience to draw from when they were like, we need to respond to this. Luckily, I know exactly what to do, because they didn't. They had to get help very quickly because their scandal was so public and forward-facing.
Right, and that's actually my first takeaway, which is that they took action immediately when these concerns were brought to their attention. That would be the remaining 3 try guys, and I'm just going to refer to those 3 as the try guys from this point forward, just to make things simpler and easier. But they really did this, from what we understand of the timeline that they have laid out since everything happened, they have come forward and said, here's what we did, and they very quickly, after receiving information about this relationship, you could say, that was going on, they started investigating very quickly. And I think that is the first thing that business owners should take away from this. When someone brings a complaint or a concern to your attention, don't try to sweep it under the rug. Take action, and take action quickly. And this is important for multiple reasons. Legally, of course, it can definitely help. If the company takes action quickly, that can definitely be something that's very helpful from a legal aspect. But, it's also important from an employee and a workplace culture standpoint. When your employees see that you do take these things seriously, and that you mean what you say when you say that you're going to investigate complaints and you're going to look into these things, that really helps grow trust and a positive workplace culture. It also, for at least the try guys in the situation, and depending on the company, could apply to all sorts of different companies, this was important given their brand. It helped show their customers, which would be their viewers, that the remaining 3 try guys were standing by their values, standing by the things their brand supposedly stood for in an authentic and real manner. So by taking quick action, they helped really get this process rolling very quickly, and did so in a way that helped mitigate from what we have seen. Again, we're all looking in from the outside here, but it seemed to help mitigate some of the fallout in the long run. Now, and of course, I think one thing that we also noticed is when we say get started on this process quickly, that doesn't just mean handling it yourself.
No.
Yeah, these kinds of complaints and issues, and especially when it involves a co-owner or a member for an LLC, that's what we call owners or co-owners, especially a managing member, but any kind of member where that may have some implications on their status as someone who owns a part of the company, but just in general when it comes to these kinds of allegations, getting your employment and business lawyers involved early on is key, very key. And Rachel, I think a lot of people think when you call in the lawyers, it makes these situations a whole thing, right?
Yeah, I think some people have this idea that oh no, if I call in the lawyer, it's going to be a big deal. As I think a more realistic look at it is, this is a big deal. Let me make sure I talk to a lawyer.
Right.
Let me make sure I get an expert in on this, because the situation already exists. All you need to make sure you do is handle it properly and appropriately.
Right, and that is why you get lawyers involved quickly, and that's something that the Try Guys did. They did not hide the fact that very early on they had a team assembled that they may have just had to find spur of the moment. We don't know, but at least of lawyers, I think HR representatives,
business lawyers, employment lawyers, HR reps, and for an ongoing multi-week process and investigation. And I'm sure they're still talking to them now, because the situation it's not over. It's still ongoing in some capacity, and I'm sure they're emailing their lawyers every day and making sure that they're handling things correctly, especially if they're reaching any agreements or anything that they have to abide by. They're like, hey, can we even say this in a video? Are we allowed to do this? Just to make sure that they don't jeopardize any progress they may have made.
Yes, and that is something why, again, you want to have your legal involved early on, making sure that you are getting that help, getting that advice that you need to help you get through the process and navigate it, because these are things that can be very tricky and just tough and intense situations all around too. Nobody ever wants to be in this situation. And another this is another takeaway, but it's a side note, and this is something where we don't know if this is true for the Try Guys at least, is, companies should make sure that their operating agreements for LLCs include provisions detailing when a member can be removed, what the reasons are, and how that process is completed.
Yes. It's something that every company should have, and most companies will hopefully never have to use.
Yes.
When we were prepping for this, I kind of thought of it like a parachute. Like, boy, I sure hope I don't have to pull this string, but if something happens, I want to have that backup. I'm like, okay, here's how I can recover. Here's how we can make this situation work. It's certainly not ideal, but it's an essential part.
Right. And you know, I think this is a hard part because oftentimes these documents are being drafted when you're starting a company or when things are going well. Yep. And nobody ever wants to think that, you know, your business partner, your friend, your spouse, your mom, your brother, whoever,
right,
that there could ever be a situation where you would need to remove them. But as Rachel said, it's one of those things where, you know, unfortunately things do happen and you will be it makes things a lot harder, we'll put it that way, when you don't have something like this added into your operating agreement. So I strongly encourage people, you know, if you own a small business, if you own, you know, of any kind, make sure you have something in your documents, that your governing documents, again, operating agreements for LLCs here, which is what the Tri-Guides company is, that details when, how, and what that process is if you do end up having to remove a part owner for the company.
I think it can be especially overlooked because so many small businesses are started between friends or between close personal relationships. And so it's like, we don't need to consult a lawyer. We trust each other. We know what we're doing. We have this great idea, and I've known you for 20 years. We don't need a backup plan.
Right. That is wrong. Always consult a lawyer. It's one of those things where it's just better to have those kinds of things in the place from the get-go. Again, there's no harm in being prepared.
Yes, if you don't need it, you'll never notice that you put it in there.
You know, I think one other thing that you brought up, another big takeaway is you know, in these situations, you do have to be very careful about
yes,
what you're saying outside of, you know, any other co-owners or the board, whoever is directly involved in the internal review, internal investigation process, and your attorneys. But outside of that little group, you got to be really, really careful about what you're saying during the process and even after the process.
And this is something that I noticed as I was kind of watching their coverage, because I've been really enjoying seeing the developments going on since I do social media. I've been, you know, eagerly observing how people have been reacting. And the whole culture of the company is generally very open, very collaborative. But when they were responding to this specific incident, you could see them, the Tri-Guys, they would change their tone a bit and talk about how they had to keep these decisions, these investigations, these activities that were still ongoing private and only, you know, talk about it with people directly involved, with the managing partners, with the attorneys, which I think is probably something that was foreign for their employees because it's usually a very open environment. But in this situation, it had to be a more formal process because it was a more serious process.
Right. And this is not just because, you know, to protect the integrity of the internal investigation, to protect the integrity of any removal process. It also has to do with protecting the other employees involved in this, as well as making sure that things are not said based off of half-truths, you could say, or an incomplete understanding of the facts. And, you know, I think it was especially difficult. I also watched the Tri-Guys put out both a video talking about what happened as well as a podcast I watched. I'll admit I watched both of them. I'm someone who's watched the Tri-Guys before. And, you know, they commented that given the very public nature of this, their employees all had a suspicion as to what was going on and what was happening, but they just really could not say anything because that's what essentially their lawyers were telling them, and that is the right thing to do. So be careful about speaking about this outside of as Rachel put it, that core group of the people directly involved. That includes, other employees, that includes social media. That just be very, very careful. When in doubt, ask your lawyers. Ask them what you should be saying if you have a crisis PR team, which most companies won't. I suspect the Try Guys did. They probably were coordinating with them and the lawyers. But make sure that you are being careful about that. And this does not end, by the way, once the removal process is done, once the investigation is closed. You still want to be careful afterwards. A lot of times there can be certain provisions in removal agreements or releases that have to do with, non-disparagement or what can and can't be said about the situation. And you also just don't want to create any potential future claims that, wouldn't be covered by some sort of settlement document. So it is always important to be very cautious about what you're saying about these things in a public setting, or even just amongst, your other employees.
Now, we're seeing the Try Guys play out on a grand scale. Most companies, I think, when they have an issue like this, probably aren't going to be trending on Twitter or make it onto SNL, but the advice stays the same, right? Even if not everyone is watching what you do, the way that the company should behave would be the same, even if it's a smaller company, one that's not being scrutinized so heavily by millions of people every day.
Yes. I mean, the things we've just gone through, it applies to your company if you've got 5 employees or if you've got 500. Making sure that you're taking action quickly, making sure that you have a process in place, formalized in your, managing documents, making sure that you are conducting the internal investigation as it needs to be conducted, and you have you've gotten the legal help that you need. All of those things are going to apply to every business that's going through this kind of process or dealing with these kinds of issues. Again, yes, as Rachel said, you may not have to worry about how the media is going to treat it. You may not have to worry about trending on Twitter and Seth Rogen asking what a Try Guy is or something. But you still, it still is a very real thing that companies every day of all sizes grapple with. And, it is a very hard thing. My heart goes out to everyone who was affected by this, because it's just not it's a terrible situation to have to go through. All right. Well, thank you again, Rachel, for joining me today on this edition of Real World Business Law, where we took a real world example, and hopefully anyone who's watching this can, if you are going through a similar situation, you can apply some of these lessons and take some of this knowledge to help navigate your journey through this process. Thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.